Running for freedom. Focus question. How do Daniel's feelings change throughout the story? Why do you think it is? Running. It was too dark outside. Usually we got up before the sun rose, but I could tell that it was too early for my father to be shaking my arm. Daniel, he whispered. No, I groaned. I had been picking cotton all day. I could still feel my fingers throbbing as I tried to wave my father away. He picked me up by the arms and carried me outside. Shh, now, he said, and I fell asleep again. Daddy was the carrier driver for Mr. and Mrs. Winters, our enslavers. My mother had taken care of little Mary Winters, but Mary was grown now and Mama was gone. I must have muttered in my sleep, because I heard Dad saying shh again. I woke up and saw dark trees. I heard soft footsteps all around. I looked over my shoulder and saw the bent back the shoulders of Emmy, another field worker on the cotton plantation. She walked with her head down, moving at a very quick pace. Can I get down? I asked Father. Emmy whipped her head around and gave me a cold lick. She put her fingers to her pursed lips and kept moving. Suddenly, I realized what was going on. We were running. Mama. Mama was sold a few years ago, when I was still too young to work in the fields. Mrs. Winters used to send me to the local inn where I did cleaning. The inn paid me for my work, but I had to make the money right home and give it to Mrs. Winters. She would count every cent and tell Mama to spank me good if she thought even one penny was missing. Mama would make it look like she was doing what she was told, but she would just tap me lightly. I would yell and cry like it really hurt. That seemed to make Mrs. Winters happy. One night I came home from the inn was usual. It had been a windy day and $1 had blown out in my hands. Mrs. Winters noticed the missing money right now. She called in the cook and told her to spank me hard. The cook didn't know about Mama's trick, so she spanked me as hard as she could. I yelled and cried for real. After it was over, I asked the cook where Mama had gone. Well, Mistress Mary's about grown now. I supposed they sold her, your Mama, to someone who needed her, she said. I felt like my heart fell down a deep well and landed on the bottom with a cold splash. Daddy's eyes looked hollow when I got back to our one-room shack. He only said one thing about Mama being sold. Someday we're going to be free, and we'll find her. That day of freedom was today. The barn. Haul in, Amy said. She pointed across the field at an old sagging barn, and we went inside. She felt around the floor until she found a trapdoor. She motioned us all into a small space under the floor. Everyone had to lie down in order to feed. Amy closed the door behind her and it was silent. Eventually, I leaned toward Daddy. Do we have to stay here all day? He nodded and put his fingers to his hip. I leave. Sleep, he said. I didn't think I could sleep. I still felt like I had energy running through all my muscles. Soon we would find Mama, but I kept still. Sunlight began to peek through the boards above us. Feet began to thump over our heads. I could tell that all of us were scared. No one was sleeping. We heard the other enslaved people talking as they worked. Did they know we were here? I almost wished that I could peek my head through the trapdoor and whisper, "Come with us, come and be free." But I kept silent, and they kept working. Going. The hours last a long day when you are crouching in an uncomfortable position. But finally night fell. The noises from the burn had been silent for some time. But we waited. Finally, Amy pushed open the door and a gust of the sweetest fresh air in the world came rolling down into the tiny place. She led us into the woods again, and we all began walking. I was so happy to be out of that cramped space that I began to run. The others started going faster too. We came to a dark road and started hopping, skipping, and jumping. Someone in the back even giggled. We were going to be free. I could feel the cold air from the north pouring down toward me and making my legs springy and light. Suddenly, I heard sounds that made every inch of my skin feel like ice. Hounds! Someone was coming after us. We all looked to Emmy. Gully, she whispered. She went leaping through the trees, and we leaped after her. We rushed down a steep hill until our legs hit swampy water. It got deeper and deeper. It was up to my thighs, then my chest. Daddy pulled me up on his shoulders. It looked like we were in trouble. We couldn't swim, but Emmy led us toward the opposite shore. There were stumps sticking out of the water there, and if we stood still under the pale moonlight, our heads would look like more stumps, especially to someone across the swamps. We heard the men and hounds come crashing down the gully, then came to the edge of the swamps where the water kept the dogs from following our scent. The dogs howled and roared like they wanted to change across the swamps and attack us. Then I heard the sound of a shotgun loading. The roar of the gun swept across the water and echoed back. It startled me so badly that I made a peep before I could stop it. Emmy's hand swiftly and silent came up and closed over my mouth. The sound of another shot blasted out across the water. The men were trying to scare us into making noise and showing ourselves. After a long time, they turned and led the hounds back up the gully. We kept still for another half an hour before we dared to creep back out of the swamps. There was no more running or laughing when we got back on the river. We passed many days in hidden spaces in the homes and barns of people who helped us along the way. We spent many nights walking silently through the woods, cold and hungry. We had little food of our own and had to rely on the people who helped us to give food. Now came the hard part. We had to cross the Ohio River in order to get to freedom. Emmy gathered us in a tight circle. "You're going to have to do something that seems completely wrong," she whispered. "You're going to go up to a white man and let him put you in chains, but he's going to help you. It'll look like he's captured you. No one will suspect you when he leads you across the bridge." We met the white man, Mr. Avery, just before dawn. Emmy wished us luck before she headed south again to find more enslaved people and lead them to freedom. Mr. Avery took most of our clothes and packed them in a trunk. He put us in shackles. Daddy looked scared. I suddenly wondered if this was all a trick for Mr. Avery to capture escaped enslaved people. I started to cry. I hated those chains. All I could think about was how Mama's hands and feet would have been in them as they led her away. "We have to trust him," Daddy said, but his voice didn't sound so sure. Mr. Avery led us through the streets. The white people ignored us. The black people glanced quickly at us and then looked away. Mr. Avery led us onto the bridge. I was crying because I was still so afraid that he would turn us around and sell us again. But then I felt my feet touch the soft soil on the Ohio side of the river. Somehow, my tired feet could tell that I was free. Even though I was still in the shackles, I felt the weight of them disappear. "We did it, Daniel," Daddy said with a shaky voice. "Someday we'll go back for her." The Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a loosely organized network of homes, trails, and people whose goal was to help enslaved people from southern states flee north to freedom. After the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the goal was to get escapees as far north as Canada. The Fugitive Slave Act allowed enslavers to recapture escapes in northern free states and take them back to the South. Hefty fines and jail time were the punishment for anyone who helped enslaved people escape. After some enslaved people were freed, they went back south to lead others north to freedom. Famous faces on the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery, but escaped and became the publisher of the North Star, an anti-slavery newspaper. Douglass's house in Rochester, New York, was one of the last stations for hundreds of enslaved people fleeing to Canada. Levi Coffins was a white anti-slavery activist in Ohio who reported helping an average of 100 enslaved people escape a year for 33 years. His house, where many enslaved people hid, rested, were fed, and clothed, is on the National Register of Historic Places. Harriet Tubman was a former enslaved people who became known for her 19 trips to the South to help at least 300 enslaved people escape north. At one time, a reward of $40,000 was offered for her capture. A famous place on the Underground Railroad. Artists rendering. Levi and Catherine Coffin greet escaping enslaved people at their home in Report, Indiana. The Coffins were credited with helping thousands of former enslaved people. Today, the Levi Coffin House is a National Historic Landmark site and museum. Children can explore the small upstairs room where the coffins hid enslaved people. A bed could be moved to conceal the door. They can also see a wagon used to hide enslaved people on the move.